Okay. Good morning. I think we'll have some people rolling in here in a minute. Um, this will be recorded, so I'll just start doing a bit of an introduction here. Okay, great. Start seeing some people rolling in. So, welcome everybody to Media Martech Week, presented by the Alberta Magazine Publishers Association. I'm so excited about this conversation today and very grateful to the Alberta Magazine Publishers Association for sponsoring this week-long conversation. We've had some amazing conversations so far. And in particular, today's is definitely going to be a banger. We've got more about that later. I'll let Ellen introduce Sarah. But so many great conversations this week and really some thought-provoking ideas that we've been sharing overall during the week about what makes a great media buy and how do we measure media. And today's for sure going to deliver on that. Um, our vision, as you know, is to make Calgary known as a world-class marketing community, and 100% confident that this conversation is going to help with that. I do want to say thank you to our partners for the 2026 season. Without you guys, I definitely wouldn't be able to do a lot of these kinds of events. And so I will pass it over to Ellen from the Alberta Magazine Publishers Association to do the introduction here. Ellen, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ellen Percival. I'm the publisher of Calgary's Child Magazine, and I'm the board chair of the Alberta Magazine Publishers Association. Welcome. We are so pleased to partner with CMA to bring you Sarah Thompson, who will share the first study of its kind to quantify the economics of media and advertising in Canada. Sarah is a well-respected media and marketing executive dedicated to advancing high-quality media environments for advertisers. In 2019, her leadership was recognized when she was named Media Leader of the Year by the Young Adults of the Canadian Media Directors Council. She has also been recognized as a Canadian Media Champion by the Ad Club of Toronto. She recently joined the board of the Friends of Canadian Media. Very busy person. Sarah is a prominent voice in support of Canadian media and shares her insights at major events across the country and abroad. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Thompson.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you to everybody joining from across Alberta. I've had the pleasure of being out to Calgary a few times in the last couple of years. I greatly appreciate any time that your community welcomes me, and thank you to the Alberta Magazine Association. I love a good magazine, so I want to make sure that we never forget the tangibility of advertising in our world. It was a couple of years ago that I endeavored to fill my time in between gigs, as a lot of colleagues have had, and thought about a question of what is our economic value and contribution to the gross domestic product in Canada? And that led to the first iteration of the Canadian Media Means Business study that looked at 2023 data in order for us to sort of quantify what does our industry create? What do journalism jobs add to our gross domestic product? What happens when we lose those jobs, and what kind of erosion happens over time? And that led me to speaking on multiple stages. Last year, I spoke at over 30 events. 2,500 people downloaded the report that was funded by media organizations of all shapes and sizes. This report is produced by Nordicity with their support. And my friend Janice took this picture of me when I was in Madrid talking to FIP and talking to the magazine industry about the economic loss that's happening in our country. And it was remarkable because there was countries all over the world talking about the same issue of sovereignty, of an economic field future connected to media and advertising, and how do they start addressing this? And so this has really gone around the world. But even with all of that, I'm still waiting for some semblance of change, some semblance for change from marketers, changes from the way our provincial and federal governments approach this space. And we'll talk about this new refreshed update of the 2024 data so that you can start to see the trend lines that we have from 2023. The reason why we end up doing it from 2023 and 2024 is because we rely a lot on StatsCan. We are looking at the complexity of how Canada reports on jobs across all industry sectors so that we have the truest component of that. And it's not an easy endeavor, and I always appreciate Nordicity's efforts because they have the modeling and the approach to do this. But we wanted to look at jobs, how many jobs are connected in media, advertising, and marketing, and the interdependence that we all have. I always come down to, if the future of our reality of advertising is based on 2 to 3 platforms, then why does any of our jobs need to exist in Canada? And then you keep going on that narrative. So it's really important to figure out how these things are all interconnected. And then we look at the gross domestic product. In this, we're looking at the dollar amount, the value added from an income approach, the salaries that we add. And there's a ripple effect that we have as an industry. There's the core of the media and advertising sector, advertising media agencies such as the one that I work at, as well as journalism jobs, broadcast jobs, radio jobs in Canada. And because we exist, we then have an indirect supplier industry that we also support, legal, HR, supporting services, associations. And collectively, we induce spending into our economy based on our salaries. We buy houses, we buy cars, we do all of that. And then there's a spillover into other industries, things like production services, CanCon content. So in 2023, it was very clear that $1 million invested in a Canadian-owned platform supports 8.2 jobs or $1 million to our GDP. It's a straight one-to-one relationship. And in 2023, it was 138,000 jobs that sat at the core of this industry. And I'll show you the bigger sort of overall ripple effect, but this is really important because this is the point of erosion that has been happening since 2019, because you don't replace like for like jobs. And even now in the media industry, when I'm finding for people applying to jobs or job loss, is they're actually happening in the digital space because we have hyper specialized skills, but we need people that are more M-shaped, that are able to think about media in a different way. Meanwhile, we are neglecting Canadian-owned and operated media by having intermediaries between us and publishers or media owners, and the siphoning of dollars in between them, which goes to the point that Ellen introduced me at. Is my biggest care is making sure that when we're doing advertising, we have great places and spaces for brands to advertise. When you think about 2024, let's go back in time. It was a very interesting year in the history of our country. A few things happened. We had Bill C-18 was in place, which meant Meta was now censoring news on the platform. We have Trump elected that fall. We had the Paris Olympics. There's this young upstart that came around the country and the world named Taylor Swift that lifted local economies. It was also a time that we started to see the trend of Canadians tightening on spending, which has been a trend that has happened since then for the past 2 years, which has affected everything from like CPG growth, retailer growth, financial services growth. Everybody's tightened their belts because we didn't know what the economic future was going to be. And in 2024, we had a little bit of an uptick, which was very nice. It means that we were supporting 8.3 jobs, but then it was still a one-to-one contribution. So for every $1 million that you put in your Canadian-owned and operated media organization, it was $1 million to our gross domestic product. And if you're interested in seeing these numbers on a provincial level, please reach out to me. I can tell you exactly how many jobs were lost. We'll speak to that too. And we were still a really big business. We've lost a little bit in the center, but we are still, employing more people than auto, than telco, than mining, air transportation. And these are all industries that make a lot of headlines all the time. They are core to the economics of our country for public policy. And you can think about it even now with Carney traveling around the world and EV incentives. There's a lot of attention paid to these, but media and advertising always kind of sits in an interesting space. It's either that we are really technology driven and we are at the center of like innovation, data, targeting, or we are seen as superfluous, unnecessary, silly. And these two things as a notion kind of helps us not shape the narrative of what we actually do for economic contribution to our country and how we actually support the broader business needs of our overall country as well. So when you add up all of the pieces of pie, it's 193,000 jobs, or 22.6 to our gross domestic product. This is significant because there are not a lot of industries of this size and scale, but we also take it a step further. You can think of math that you've seen from your agencies of how much incremental growth you've had or new contribution. And if you didn't do a media campaign, that your business wouldn't have grown and you wouldn't have had jobs. These are all really important factors to think about. One that's often overlooked is CanCon content. So with the advent of having YouTube and other channels that repurpose what we have on our broadcasters, or even the growth of connected TV in Canada, which is a great opportunity, especially if you're looking at Crave or Stack or the CBC, there's a lot of opportunities to do things differently than linear, but linear still has 80% reach in most of our country. It's higher in Quebec, but it's really important to consider the fact that we can't also defund our own content because the ripple effect is affecting production. And without that, we wouldn't have had hits like Heated Rivalry or Schitt's Creek or what is to come in broadcast and television, which is Canadian culture, Canadian content, Canadian jobs being produced. And they're a huge economic driver for our country, contributing about $1.6 billion to our gross domestic product. And those shows don't exist without ad dollars, which contributes to 42% of overall contribution from ad sales. So these things are all interdependent from an economic perspective. With all of that, you might think, wow, 2024, we are sneaking one past the goalie. We look like we're doing really well. And it's not that we're not doing well. It's more of a question of where are we having losses and when do those losses start to be felt? So in 2024, we lost 400 jobs, but it wasn't a uniform job loss. When you break it out province by province, we lost jobs in areas where we actually need them, so that you have community-based media in Alberta, Prince Edward Island, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, Manitoba. The reason why this is incredibly important, and even Calgary is well known for being underserved for quality access to news, is because it holds your politicians to account. It holds your community together. It tells the story of life there. Where you see a shift is in provinces in 2024 in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Quebec. And the interesting part about those two provinces at this moment in time is they've taken a public policy stance that has helped safeguard. Quebec's language protection has done extraordinary things for their overall ad environment. They also have an association that has existed longer of making sure that more money is being dedicated to French-based language and local publishers. So they've done it in protection mode. In Nova Scotia, they're taking a growth mode. They're taking a competitive stance. They're looking at funds and how do I incentivize and how do I attract jobs and how do I bring international studios and how do we bolster this further for our industry? And the total amount of pie, 53% of these jobs exist because of ad dollars staying in Canada. So as we lose this, we erode our own jobs within our country. And we're starting to see that decline in 2024. We're starting to dip again another 2 points. And that loss starts to add up. We've lost a couple of bills in this journey. In fact, we've lost $200 million in a blink of an eye just by the loss of those jobs. And if we don't pay attention to that, that continues to erode the rest of the pie as we go. We don't have more Canadian content. You don't have higher quality places to advertise. You don't have sovereignty over Canadian culture. So if you add up what's happening is we were losing about 8 jobs daily in 2024. And often I feel like this person, He is a firefighter standing there watching Canada burn in 2024. Because there's another macro factor that we all need to consider, which is in this time, we're starting to see double-digit ad growth in digital advertising. But the shift is we've seen now a 30% drop again in investment in Canadian owned and operated media when it comes to digital. We get very excited about digital advertising. It is the easiest thing to do. You go in a self-serve function, you select some interest, you let it run, and you hope that you gain some incremental or some other opportunities. And it's the easiest thing for media agencies to go between brief and plan. I have 15 days. It's going to be an easy pie chart. Or things like principal trading, where there's incentives to use particular partners in order to offset your loss in full-time or agency fees. There's so many things going on that causes this, but we need to start challenging it, because when you blow it out and start progressing this sort of loss overall and the trajectory of what is happening, we can look at it this way. So the left is billions of dollars, the bottom is years. It speaks to where we are at this moment of time. The pink line is the overall expected growth of the advertising market in Canada. So we will continue to invest in advertising. Some of my colleagues think that we're actually invested per capita in advertising to Canadians. I think there's also a lot of waste that we've created for ourselves. At the top end, a significant part of that is going to be the growth of digital advertising spend. Platforms, programmatic, connected TV, all of these things will just have a growth trajectory, more tech, more ad tech, more capabilities, more targeting. The blue line is the money leak. So as we inevitably look at a growth trajectory of both the ad market and digital ad spend, what's happening is the money just keeps going in the same direction for how much actually leaves our economy. It's almost as if attaching a pipeline and from Calgary into the United States, and instead of it being oil flowing through, it's just straight cash. And at the bottom, you will see the rest of Canadian media and Canadian digitally owned media. So it is not a great story for publishers, media owners that have a digital presence, who have more intermediaries between them and the advertiser, hoping for some better targeting, better capabilities, ease. That's a factor. We start to choose more made for advertising environments. We're not paying attention to context. But the erosion here also starts leaking into the rest of Canadian media. And we're already seeing that from a job loss picking up. This looks at a lot of jobs across radio, television, newspaper, and pay and specialty. And we're now hitting in 2024, not the same loss as we had in 2020 because of COVID, but we're starting to hit an area where we're losing more radio, television, broadcasting jobs, and newspaper jobs are starting to pick up. So if I forecast this out further, we're starting to lose jobs at a rapid rate. And now we've lost about 11,000 journalism jobs in our country, which means we're not reporting on ourselves. And the juxtaposition of that is always like, well, we have a trust in journalism problem. Yes, that is 100% true. There's a significant part of, underpinning of people believing things in other environments and not trusting mainstream journalism. But where the trust sits the most in our country is with community-based media. The newspaper, the publication, the magazine, the radio station that you listen to all the time. We often lose trust in national publications, but where we're eroding the most amount of jobs is in our local communities. And that means that 1/3 of all of our staff and journalists lost their job in the last 5 years. And that's significant for a lot of reasons. We have more news deserts, more places where there is underreporting of what's going on in your community, the life, your kid's hockey team, everything and anything, climate change, forest fires. We also have a polarization. You end up in smaller rural communities of mass separate perspective on what's going on in the world because they don't have anything other than X or Meta and community-based things of self-reporting. You have decreased civic engagement. People don't turn out to vote. You start to lose your local identity. You have hyper niche sort of behaviors that start happening within these communities. Of course, as I talked about, an erosion of trust, but also sort of mass delusions start happening. And there's a great quote that, if you've ever read his book from Yuval Harari, he speaks to something that often is sort of underestimated, and something that I would love for you all to take away to dinner conversation, which is, we are flooded with all types of information. And it is very easy with the advent of AI and people stripping content and getting a citation and an answer from like a engine like Perplexity or ChatGPT. But the problem with that is that the truth just is sinking to the bottom. And so we need more organizations to support truth. It has nothing to do with journalism being a charity or an investment, because I can speak to dozens of reports and industry findings that suggest every single time when you advertise in a news environment, your ads are seen and they perform better. Yesterday, you listened to a conversation talking about attention. The context of the article is important, yes. The context of the publication, the space that it sits, is also important. And Marshall McLuhan is correct. The medium is the message. The medium determines not only the level of success of your ad unit in context of everything else around it, but it also determines your level of trust, your expectation of that medium. And think about it too when you next open up any number of apps or platforms on your phone. If you open up and go to the Calgary Herald and you open up and look at Meta or Instagram, which one inherently, before you even opened it up, did you have a moment where I trust this slightly more? And that's the thing that we need to pay very close attention to. We all have a duty of protecting our industry, but also preserving great advertising spaces, because everyone's more likely to see those ads. So let's not fund fraud or the growing world of made for advertising. And even yesterday in connected TV, I got a report that said the increase in connected TV fraud, invalid traffic, is growing, but it's hyped. It's got an opportunity. Go direct. Go direct to any number of our Canadian partners and have a conversation with them. Try to get to the source of the actual audience. And when you start adding up this sort of cumulative issue that we have, is that ad share is going to drop. We're going to have losses of over 25,000 jobs in our country. And digital market capture will start to be 97% foreign and 3% domestic. This is a huge loss to how we look at sovereignty, information, and the advertising environments that we can control. It's doing the hard work, because by 2023, $100 in digital ads in Canada will end up being $1.4, $1.50 to a Canadian media company. And that's inevitably not the story we want, because that's not media efficiency, that's market cannibalization. We're trading the opportunity of growing a consumer base for short-term programmatic gain. And this is so important for us to really, really pay attention to, because every marketer wants to have a great environment, great context, and a great opportunity. Chasing just efficiency and scale in our country no longer is differentiating. Anybody can go on a platform and buy any ad unit targeting the exact same audience. And if you see your CPMs going up, that's why. It's accessible and it's easier to waste money. So I feel a little bit like this often of, we could be gold medalists. We could be so exceptional, but we have a few reasons that we haven't solved this. One is naive math. We end up chasing cheap impressions, cheap CPMs. We lost sort of the understanding of looking at log level data. We trust in the thing that's the most recent, that sits in front of us, that is the most urgent as the truth. And it's hard not to argue with that, especially if you have to go into a conversation with your CFO. You have to talk to them about some sort of math. I was talking to a client yesterday. They're like, how do I have a conversation with my CFO about why that billboard that you want to do is more valuable than us doing, you know, this much money on a platform? And I understand the challenge, but it's the challenge that we all have to rise to if we want to have great environments. The other reason that this happened is that we've added a complexity to our supply chain that is indicative of what they have in the United States. They're in between like an advertiser and an audience in connected TV. There are 300 different ways of buying that audience. That's insane. Especially when only Canadians subscribe to maybe 3.5 connected TV channels. In programmatic, you can go at it from a multitude of different ways. You can do open exchange. You can go through this programmatic partner. You can do direct. And there's a lot of siphoning. You add in some targeting, you add in something else, and your costs of ad serving just went through the roof. So the complex supply chain means everything in the middle, because we're not building Canadian ad tech enough outside of StackAdapt. We're just removing it from our economy and removing it from the hands of our publishers. We also have a lack of elephant memory in our industry. We forget all of the things that have transpired, of metrics that moved, things that changed, ad placements that went wrong, viewability that was reported one way with a platform and the next day another way. And these are things that you wouldn't get with Canadian media owners. In fact, if you're buying TV, they want to make good. They want to make it right. But if you're working with a platform and you underdeliver impressions, it feels like they're giving you a gift to make up for the impressions that they lost. You're paying for it. They underdelivered to your expectation when you needed a campaign market. And the last one that's kind of happening is just a lack of proactive action. Is it because we are all innately Canadian and we are so risk averse that we don't want to try to do something different? Is it because we don't want to cross the aisle or have a conversation? But what's really clear is that by the nature of what we're doing, we end up defunding our own customers. We're dismantling an economic engine that keeps our country going, bolt by bolt, dollar by dollar, that's needed for future growth. And I'll give you my for instance. Right now, consumer packaged goods, the growth of that in Canada has perpetually stalled because of consumer spending. But we're now outpacing in digital advertising, we're outpacing the consumer. So in that is inherently waste. If you've gone full into digital, you need to start thinking holistically about where's the opportunity to grow and be different. Because if you're going super niche into things, that's not growth and that's not evergreen. We're also number one in some other areas. I thought I'd give you some hope. I'm actually being sarcastic. I am a Scorpio after all. We don't have a lot of public support for our industry, despite what we see in Bill C-18, the Online Streaming Act, actions that the Ontario government has made of directing government dollars toward Canadian publishers, et cetera, et cetera. We're actually really low for public support, and that also doesn't help on our job loss rate, which is anywhere between 14 to 30%, depending on your province. But we have a huge multiplier effect for the jobs that we have that induce our local economy. And if you compare it to other nations, when we had the CBC up for debate in the last federal election, CBC is actually really underfunded in comparison to other jurisdictions. But the one here that I want to point out is that South Korea has taken a different kind of stance. They have a similar growth to us. They have invested heavily in their own sovereignty and in an aggressive cultural industrial policy. If anybody has a child under the age of 18, or maybe you've all watched K-pop Demon Hunters. They've started exporting their culture, versus what we do in Canada is that we wait and regulate. We wait for things to happen. We tax. We do things because we're not really understanding sort of what we should be funding. So the difference between the two is Meta and Google in that market have less than a 50% share. In Canada, we're heading towards 90% share. And they have built infrastructure and jobs, and they're investing. We are sitting and reacting and waiting and thinking that it's predetermined. So there's something in how we approach this of a proactive nature. Either it's advertising incentives in Canadian media, funding new innovation, building ad tech stacks in Canada that are sovereign, thinking about the same way when it comes to data and data sovereignty in the ad space. How much of Canadian data flows out of our country and comes back to us? Same thing can be said for the creator economy. If you're working with creators, how much money goes from Canada to another country and back to the creator. These sort of loopholes and way money flows is really important to understand and requires more compliance, audit, conversation. But we also need to be building for ourselves. The good news is in 2024, $1 in advertising in Canadian media adds this to our GDP. And if every marketer just had a conversation with their agency a little bit differently, if you just shifted 10% to Canadian media and focused on that, even the CMDC asked for 25% increase for local media, we would start sort of recovering on an economic loss instead of having this downward trajectory that we're predicting by 2030 that creates fewer quality advertising environments, fewer journalism jobs, less Canadian content, less heated rivalries, less Schitt's Creek. These are things that are the hallmarks. And if I play that out even further, and I start thinking about things like hockey rights, sports rights, can our local broadcasters even compete when those rights are up for grabs against streaming platforms? Do we lose even sports like the NHL, that is the national hockey pastime that already is hard enough to find where to watch it, to platforms and no longer on the CBC or Bell or Rogers? Do we lose our sports? So it's really important to start paying attention to these things with your ad dollars, asking the critical questions about where's your money going, where's the waste, where is it wasted impressions? Did that, intermediary of ad tech actually create growth for my business? Did it add to it? Can I do something differently here? Can we do the hard work, not just efficiency, not just the easy? Can we also start talking about supporting us on parity as an industry and having more proactive economic policy so that we're building things in our country versus reacting to platforms and using that in discussions of tariff wars with the United States? And the last part, and this is always my request to any marketer in our industry, when was the last time that you sat down with any other publisher that wasn't a platform or something in a programmatic space? When was the last time you went and saw your local TV broadcaster or went to the newsroom or had a conversation or just talked to a publisher that you've never spoken to again? It's really important that we cross the aisle and work together, because I have never had a Canadian media partner not answer my phone, not fix a problem, not create new opportunities, not get excited about a new brief, not want to see possibility with us. And that is something that we need to hold on to with both hands. I want to thank everybody for having me today for this. I know we'll open this up to a few questions, but I want to leave you all with this passing thought. Money in our industry actually matters. Take away even the advertising factor. Media is a high net worth advertising function. It is something that we should take with more seriousness than we actually do, because it ripples across our economy. It is something connected directly to our sovereignty. If we want to say buy Canadian, there's no better place to buy Canadian than in our Canadian media and advertising partners in our own country. And we can't neglect that, because before you know it, it will be gone. And that is tragic for all of you who want to grow your businesses and your brands and keep our jobs. Thank you to Mark. Thank you to everybody for hosting me. I will take a few questions.
I'm very excited about this presentation. Thanks very much, Sarah and Ellen, and Suzanne. If you want to join, feel free. First of all, the one thing that was shocking to me, and I stole some of your presentation notes for a presentation that I did last week, and it was shocking to me. Well, it was in a good way. Like, I gave you credit and all that, but just the size.
I don't need the credit.
Yeah. No, but the size of the industry is fascinating. I think you're right. Like, in a lot of ways, we kind of dismiss advertising as sort of like the coloring department. We get labeled misappropriately a lot of times as something that doesn't matter. When you think about the economic impact of Canadian advertising industry, it's shocking, I find. Like, it was just mind-blowing to me that we're the size that we are, and yet we kind of pretend like we're something else.
I think a lot of it too is that we just end up being grateful. Um, right? Like you grow up and you start with a $35,000 a year job, depending on where you started your career, and you work your way up to the senior leadership positions, and you just end up in a space and place that you kind of survived.
Right.
And I think too, when you think about sort of the industry and the changes that we've had over the past 15 years, especially in media, everybody was trained by a platform. We
Right.
weren't training Canadians on Canadian media. And now it's very easy to find a digital programmatic person to hire. It's really easy. It is
Right.
very hard to find somebody who understands TV, radio, print buying. Like it's very hard. And by the nature of just that, we end up missing on opportunities for marketers to find niche and evergreen ways of connecting with audience because you
Yeah.
hold on to a magazine and a newspaper. I will always say I don't think the consumer killed print. I think print got expensive, but I also think we killed it because it's not an easy thing to buy. So the hard work also is on the other side of our media partners that need to figure out ways of making direct buys and direct relationships easier. And I'll give my latest, for instance. I'm executing on a campaign with a client right now and it has something like 50 print suppliers. Everybody gave me a PDF media kit that we have to go through line by line, get the sizing, get the bleed, get the costing, figure out the math, because nobody says it the same way. It's the right thing to do, but it's not always the easiest thing to do. And we
Yeah.
need to figure out how to build that infrastructure in our country for it. But the reverence for our profession, we need to be excited. We create economic power. We drive sovereignty. We support Canadian information. We support Canadian culture. We need
Mhm.
to turn it on its head a little bit and start having a different conversation. So I feel you on that, but there's something about the reverence that we need to take a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, I loved your point about the training that we're getting is from the platforms. When I think about things like Mad Men as an example, and George Lois was one of the inspirational sort of Mad Men, original Mad Men people, and he came up with the Tommy Hilfiger campaign way back when that made really Tommy Hilfiger. And I think about like the story that I heard from him, the way he told it in this movie I watched. I'm a weird guy that watches movies about advertising people, but he talked about like if you're ready, I'll make you famous, and it's up to you to deliver on that and make sure that you
Mhm.
do good. So they ran this great billboard campaign that was really controversial and compelling, and was super successful. And that was the output that he was looking for was the impact. And I think about what we're doing now in a lot of cases, how we're being trained by the platforms. It's how can I lower CPMs? How can I lower cost per click? How can I increase my ROAS? Which is a different outcome than like a Mad Men era outcome, which was did I drive sales? It's more about the in-platform metrics that you become obsessed with. And so it's interesting because now we're in this position where there's more and more evidence coming out around the targeting capabilities that we have isn't nearly as good as what we thought on the digital side. You know, as cookies are going away, it's becoming more and more obvious that targeting is. There's one from Nico Newman that I saw that just between men and women, like we have the ability to target men and women, and the accuracy of actually reaching men versus women is 42%. It's less than accurate than a coin flip.
Mhm.
So it's just fascinating to me. It's like the idea of contextual targeting that we were talking about before. Maybe if you could just talk about the importance of that a little bit, and the difference between what that means versus what we think digital efficiency is with the digital advertising ecosystem.
Yeah, I think truthfully, we like to chase how can I attract somebody cheaper in the highest ROAS? And often ROAS is also a misnomer because if your ROAS was good, it usually means you got a customer that you were going to get anyway. It's the
Right.
same problem of like thinking about that we have a funnel. Well, in that funnel, are you paying for someone that probably would have done the behavior anyway? That's a
Right.
question mark that every marketer should be asking themselves and going to their media agency and talking about as well. But there's sort of a layer to context that's really important. We've landed in a place where we jumped kind of the shark and went straight to like personalization is the only thing that matters. I don't know about you, even with all my knowledge of the industry and all of that, I have yet to have an ad unit be 100% personalized in a way that I actually wanted it received. And so we chased like a panel survey disconnected from like results. The actual thing that people wanted was relevance. And then you build off of relevance into trust. Do you trust from that? Do you trust the creator within TikTok or do you trust TikTok?
Right.
Those are two different conversations because the algorithm within the platform has served up a person that you trust to keep you on that platform. Makes complete sense. That's their business model. They're monetizing time on site. They are monetizing your engagement. Get it. But if I then said, do you trust that person more or do you trust CTV? Do you trust more the Calgary Herald? Like context isn't just the article that you're sitting beside. Context is also in the media environment itself.
Right.
And we were talking about before is like Marshall McLuhan had a lot of great things to say about this issue that are now coming to a fore, which is the media is the message. Your brain does mental hurdles before you enter any media environment to understand, do I trust it more or less?
Yeah.
Right? Do I believe it more or less? Like put aside time spent and addictive. And then add to the layer of that in platforms, if you were targeting an in-market automotive audience, that means anybody can target that in-market automotive audience. That's not finding greener fields. That's fighting a ground warfare between other brands where you're not building more mental availability or salience. My example of this is I was in market to lease a car a couple of years ago. And I went to the dealer's website. So I got cookies. They had my email address. So now I'm in a first party hash data list that's got uploaded to Meta and Google. And now I'm within Instagram and I'm looking at cars and I just wanted to see how many ads am I going to be served in a day against everybody else in the auto space? And the answer was 33.
Oh, wow.
33 automotive ads came at me because I am fair game. And we've all experienced this. Either you were going on a vacation, you were looking at something in the housing market, you were looking at a new credit card. You are now fair game for everybody. You have been tagged as intent. And the problem with that is the only brands that actually get your attention in that are brands that did the heavy labor of brand building and building those mental connections over decades. The brands that lose are the ones of like, they've never done anything else but digital advertising. This is why you have direct to consumer brands fold if they just went growth marketing and they did nothing else that actually built memory banks of like, I recognize you, I understand you, and in this it makes sense. The only ad I clicked on was Volvo. And the only reason is because I have a 6-year-old and I was concerned about safety and they invented the seatbelt. And I like it stayed with me forever. All their campaigns have been about safety. I'm like, I will consider that. But the brand that I actually had intent wasn't advertising to me, didn't reach out, didn't do anything. So where's the waste? That's the easiest action you can take. And it's connecting these things together and thinking about it holistically. I am not a different person in TV than I am in Instagram, than I am in another environment. I'm all the same person. But the way advertising is like, we must maximize you in Instagram and neglect you over here. And that's not how this works. We transverse it. There's no funnel. I could recognize a brand in one space because of an out-of-home ad or a radio ad and purchase them in the next second. But we're trying to connect these dots in a way and asking the wrong questions, which should be, where's the waste? Ask your agency in everything that you did that proved everything that you did was right, where was everything that was wrong? And start to learn from that.
I have I've seen Darcy is online, and sorry to call you out, Darcy, but so in B2B, is this any different in your mind in B2B? Like the media apparatus, the capability of targeting, and this is not a question that Darcy asked, I'm just asking because you remind me of B2B. because I've worked in B2B before as well, and it was like this perception, oh, we can, get these targeted lists of in-market people, and just target exclusively just them because it's so much better. You know what I mean? Through a digital platform and through third-party providers and blah, blah, blah. Do you see any like ideas around that there's any unique differences in B2B than in B2C targeting?
I mean, there's so much to unpack in that.
Yeah.
One is that the easiest thing that people end up doing is LinkedIn and then targeting to title. And then again, you're competing against everybody else who can do the same habit. The other part that often is overlooked in our country, which is our superpower, which is our FSA, the physical location to which you live, to understanding where do people go into the office and where do they live. And there's interesting juxtapositions of that, even if I think about Calgary, right? You have a growth area in places like Bow Valley. You have railways that's starting to be built, but we would end up targeting everybody in downtown Calgary.
Right.
We miss, if you don't understand, like, I'm a full human.
Yeah.
There's spaces and places where you can be a little bit different. And also, most often in B2B, when you're targeting somebody and you're going, they're in market. Were they in market 6 months ago?
Yeah.
Are you bidding against somebody where the decision is made, or are you building the same mental availability for the next decision? Because it's very easy to have the same B2B toolkit that everybody else is. I'm doing some LinkedIn, I've done some webinars, I've done a white paper I can download, I did a full page print ad, and I've done some conferences, right? That toolkit is standard fare. Where can you, as a marketer in a B2B space, show up and maybe really consider a day in the life, how they live, other things that they read, things, unexpected places and spaces that you can appear that are a little outside the norm. Because that's how you garner attention, by being in a space where not everybody else is. It goes back to my automotive analogy. It's like, if I was going to equate that to real life, it's like I'm being chased by 33 dealers down the road. It's the same thing. That's not a great experience. Find a space where you stand out, where you connect. That's what creative is doing, right? Your brand shows up with differentiation. Media can do the same thing. It just requires more work and imagination and just going like, there's a toolkit. Where do I break that toolkit? Where do I do it a little bit differently than everybody else?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I keep coming back to this idea. It's like, in a way, cookies going away was probably the greatest thing that ever happened to advertising.
It was a guess. Also, most people don't understand why the cookie was created. The advertising industry weaponized something that was used by publishers so that if you had a subscription to a newspaper and you came back to the website, you didn't have to log in again. That's great. That's a great user experience. But we weaponized that and then started inferring and then started guessing. And that's where you get to your point before about targeting. How much of what we do is guessing?
Yeah.
How much of what we're doing is classic media psychology? And if you don't have a great ad environment that you can actually control and you're in a great context, versus Meta, which is now renowned for how much fraud they've had on their platform, your ads are in context of fraud.
Yeah.
I'm not in fraud when I'm on linear TV in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a magazine. Yeah.
So context goes a little bit bigger than just article publication. Add it to the environment. It's the same in, like, if you are an advertiser and you're on one of those deep scroll recipe sites, do you like those advertisers on that recipe site? Really think about that. Probably not. But it's an ad load of a video and interstitials, and I can't get to the recipe and I have to skip through 1,000 things. But great brands end up on those sites funding it. And I do need my recipes, but the context of all of that adds up, not just the context of the article, the site, or the user. The context of the ads that sit around you are also important.
To me, this kind of boils down to this idea of quality. Like, there's a quality of media that I think, because we went, I worked in a time when, like, I worked at Rogers selling traditional media, and then I became a digital guy, and so digital was awesome because there's this promise of being able to do everything and all the things, and
And
target
easy.
down to the single person and the person one-to-one that you talked about. And now here we are 15 years later, let's say, since that digital revolution, and we're still trying to figure out which half of that budget is wasted. We don't really have any more clarity on what is incremental than what we ever did before. And so it's kind of like we just keep squeezing the trigger, just hoping that we're going to get better stuff out of it without really thinking about how is the sausage being made, which is
Mhm.
part of why I love this report you did, because it's kind of like not only asking like how is the sausage being made, but it's also like let's think about what our dollars are, where our dollars are going, which is
Yeah.
so interesting because it's a bigger part of the whole conversation.
And having the conversation within that, because the one thing that I think is the biggest disservice that has happened in our industry is not talking about waste. I think 20 years ago, we talked about waste a lot when it came to linear TV. It was a language that was true both client side and our side, and somewhere that got lost in lieu of words like efficiency and optimization. And just because it's efficient and you've optimized doesn't mean it was good and not wasteful.
Right.
And it's an easy thing to pump in volume, more frequency, more ad units, more. It is a very hard thing to build a really smart investment plan in media that ensures that your ads are actually seen, that will produce value. That's hard work. And
Yeah.
in the media world, we've decided, well, if it's easy and I can buy it really quickly, why do I pay you for any expertise? And I'm like, I want every dollar to actually count to your business. That's what we should be asking our media agencies to do and our media partners, because that's the point, is there should be no waste,
Yeah.
not just cheap and more.
Yeah. Yeah. Cheap isn't always good.
No, I can buy a lot of things really cheap and tell you that I got you 300 million impressions. Doesn't mean that I moved your business forward. I can do
Yeah.
that very easily. Anybody can. And this also connects to the same issue, is because from an advertising perspective, small and medium sized businesses usually hire a growth marketer first. And those people are platform based.
Right.
So they're in the environment that they know, but is that growth? Where is the evergreen?
Right.
Where's the audience my competition doesn't see? Where is it on a macroeconomic field, a physical field, physical plane? Because our
Yeah.
country has changed a lot, and most of us don't understand how it has changed. But I can cookie you and I can chase you around the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that point. The price is not the same thing as cost. Like that
Nope.
we're paying a
Or
seat.
value.
Right. Right. It has nothing to do with it. Yeah. And there's a cost there if you don't get buy something at the right price.
Yeah.
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 So fascinating. This has been unbelievable, Sarah. Yeah, such a great conversation. It's so important for us to have this conversation. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for having me. And for everybody here, the report will be out in 2 weeks. Follow us on Canadian Means Business on LinkedIn. If you want to have conversation, or you need a data point for a conversation, or you just want a second look at something that you've always wanted to ask a question about. I do this a lot for colleagues in our industry. It's really important to be way more honest about money than ever before in the history of our
Yeah, great point. I'm just going to take over the screen real quick and just let everyone know here. Still, there's one more session tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Not all measurement is equal. Also, it could be a really interesting conversation. Again, thanks to the Alberta Magazine Publishers Association for their partnership and sponsorship throughout this week. Really appreciate everything that you guys have done. And for everyone that's still on, thanks for joining and hanging on to the conversation. Looking forward to more conversations like this. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you all.